In a previous video on this channel, we talked about rate limiting, which was about controlling how many requests a client can make in a given time window. Throttling is the next logical concept, and it's widely used, and also lots of engineers confuse rate limiting with throttling. Now, while the two are often mentioned together, they're actually solving very different problems. And we'll get into exactly how they differ later on in this video, but first, let's try and understand what throttling actually is. Let's start with a real example. Imagine you're running an e-commerce platform. It's a normal Tuesday. Your servers are handling maybe like 500 requests per second. Product pages, search queries, add to cart actions, everything seems fine. And then you send out a big promotional email to about 2 million subscribers. The email goes out at 10 a.m. By 10:01 a.m., you have 50,000 people hitting your site at the same time. And requests spike to 15,000 per second. Your app servers start training. Your database connection pool, which had a hard limit of 200 connections, get exhausted in seconds. Queries start queuing up. Response times go from 80 milliseconds to 8 seconds. Users start seeing errors. The site goes down. And none of these users did anything wrong. There was no abuse, no bot, no bad actor. It was just too much legitimate traffic arriving too fast for the system to handle. And this is exactly the problem that throttling solves. With throttling in place, when that spike hits, the system doesn't try to process all 15,000 requests per second at once. Instead, it says, I can safely handle 2,000 requests per second right now. I'll process those. And the rest of them, I'll either queue them up and get to them shortly, or I'll ask clients to slow down and retry in a moment. The database never gets overwhelmed, response times stay reasonable, the site stays up. The key idea is that throttling is about pacing, matching the flow of incoming work to what the system can actually handle, and not slamming the door shut, not letting everything flood in. It's somewhere in between control and deliberate. So the important part is throttling is not about punishing the clients, it's about keeping your system alive. When a system is throttling, it isn't necessarily rejecting requests outright. It might be delaying them by holding the requests for a moment and processing them when capacity frees up, or queuing them by putting them in a line and draining the line at a steady pace, gradually reducing what it accepts by letting fewer and fewer requests through as load increases, and rejecting them, which means that if things are bad enough, yes, it will reject as well. So just to reiterate, the key idea about throttling is about pacing. The system is trying to match the incoming flow of work, what it can actually handle, and not just slam the door shut. So the important part is throttling is not just about blocking. It's just slow down and stay in control. By the way, just want to inform you that this video is part of a long ongoing playlist series called System Design for Beginners. It has more than 50 videos and has covered multiple topics like rate limiting, API gateways, load balancing, and so on. And this throttling video is just a logical part of that playlist. There's another playlist on this channel called the Intermediate System Design series. If you binge watch both of these playlists, you'll know system design better than 99% of the people on the planet. Make sure you check them out. Now, your system has a limit, whether you like it or not. Each server has a ceiling. CPU, memory, database connections, disk I/O, all of these are finite. When the incoming rate of work exceeds what the system can process, things don't just slow down gracefully. Queues start building up, latency spikes, eventually the whole thing crashes. Throttling is what you put in place so the system never gets pushed past that ceiling in the first place. Now, spikes are normal, but they're still dangerous. So traffic doesn't really arrive at a perfectly steady rate. You get flash sales, viral moments, a big email blast goes out, and suddenly you have 10x your normal traffic in a matter of seconds. Even if a system can handle the average load just fine, a sudden spike can take it down. Throttling smooths out those spikes. Instead of the system absorbing the full shock at once, it paces the work, letting some of the requests through immediately while queuing the others and processing them as capacity allows. Now, cascading failures are the real enemy, and in a distributed system, services talk to each other. If service A gets overwhelmed, it slows down. Service B, which depends on service A, starts timing out. Service B's queues fills up. Now, service C, which depends on B, starts failing too. One overload service has taken down the whole chain. Throttling breaks this chain. By keeping each service within its healthy operating range, you prevent one bad moment from cascading into a full outage. Now, sometimes it's not your own service that's the bottleneck. It's something downstream. A third-party API or a legacy database or a payment processor, all of these systems have their own limits, and they don't care about how fast your app servers can go. Throttling lets you be a good citizen to your dependencies, making sure you never send them more than they can handle, which keeps everything stable. Now that you understand throttling properly, let's clear up the confusion between rate limiting and throttling, because this comes up in almost every system design conversation. Rate limiting is about the client. It says you specifically have made too many requests, slow down. It's about fairness and quotas. The system rejects your request and moves on. Throttling is actually about the system. It says, we as a backend are under too much stress right now. We need to slow things down, not because of who you are, but because of what's happening inside. It's about keeping the backend alive and healthy. Think of it this way. Rate limiting is a bouncer checking your ID at the door. Throttling is the venue saying, We are at capacity, everyone. Please slow down. We'll let people in as space opens up. What you need to know is rate limiting protects against bad clients, throttling protects against a system that's about to fall over. In practice, a production system uses both, often at the same time. Rate limiting protects against bad actors or greedy clients, throttling protects against the system itself getting overwhelmed. They work at different layers for different reasons, and one does not replace the other. Now let's talk about how throttling actually works under the hood. The same algorithms from rate limiting show up here, but the intent is slightly different. Here we're using them to protect the backend, not police the client. The first one is token bucket, and it's the most popular, and you already know this one from the rate limiting video. A bucket fills up with tokens at a steady rate. Each request needs a token to proceed. If the bucket is empty, the request has to wait or get rejected. In throttling, the bucket represents the system's current capacity, and when tokens are available, the system is healthy and requests flow freely. When the bucket runs dry, it means that the system is at its limits, and new requests need to slow down. The nice thing about token bucket is that it allows short bursts. If your system has been lightly loaded and tokens have accumulated, a sudden spike can be absorbed without anyone noticing. What you need to know here is token bucket is the go-to for most real. Now, before we continue, I want to take a few seconds and go a bit off topic and tell you about the Algoroq cohort, which is a live cohort that I run with usually 10 to 15 engineers in a cohort, because I'm trying to solve a problem, which is that there are no cohorts that exist for senior engineers. Basically, people who already know the basics of architecture and system design and now want to build the next generation of production software in the post-AI world. So this is a 12 weeks program, and we cover topics like advanced system design, AI native system design, architecture for the post-AI world, and tips and tricks to using AI coding tools, but from a senior engineer perspective. So I'm planning the next cohort, which is actually going to be my third cohort, around the mid or end of May 2026. So I wanted to go through the algoroq.io website, which is algoroq.io. And I want you to check out these topics that we'll be covering in this cohort. And if this interests you, you can fill up the form that opens up when you hit the enroll button. Once you fill up the form, I'll check to see if you're a great fit, and we'll set up a call with you. Now it's $2,500 for the entire live cohort, which I teach personally, and it's a great experience. And once you fill up the form, you can actually talk to any of the people who have attended the cohort previously, and then decide if you want to go ahead or not. Now that's the live cohort, but if you just wanted access to pre-recorded cohort videos, that'll be about $800. All right, now back to the video. The next is leaky bucket, because this is stricter. Requests come in at whatever rate they want, but they all go into a queue, and that queue drains at a fixed constant rate. So no bursts and variations allowed. It's just a steady, predictable output. This is very useful when you're protecting a downstream system that genuinely cannot handle any type of spike. It could be a legacy database, a third-party API with hard limits, and you want to guarantee that no matter what's happening upstream, the downstream always sees smooth, constant traffic. The trade-off is that if too many requests pile up in the queue, they either wait a long time or get dropped. There's no burst tolerance here. Leaky bucket is great for protecting fragile downstream systems, and it's not great if your users expect low latency. The next is fixed window counter, which count requests in fixed time windows, say X requests per minute. If the count goes over that limit, new requests are throttled until the next window opens up. So this one is simple to implement, it's cheap to run, but it has the same boundary burst problem as we saw in the rate limiting video. Make sure you check it out. Wherein a burst at the end of one window and the start of the next can slip through double the intended limit. So this is good for simple cases, but not precise enough for high stakes throttling. The next is the sliding window algorithm, which is instead of hard window boundaries, it looks at a rolling time frame. This is more accurate because it catches the bursts that fixed windows miss. But this takes more memory and computation to maintain. Not all throttling is the same. There are two broad styles. The first is hard throttling, where the system sets a firm limit. Hit it and you're rejected. No exceptions, no grace period. This is what you use when exceeding the limit would be genuinely dangerous, like pushing a database past its connection limit or hitting a downstream API that charges per request. The next is soft throttling. The system has a base limit, but it allows some overage, say up to 10% above the limit, before it kicks in. During that overage window, requests might still get through, but the clients get warned via headers that they're in overage state. This is better for user-facing APIs where you don't want to be unnecessarily harsh, and minor transient spikes can get absorbed without the user ever knowing. Now, just like rate limiting, throttling is not something you put in just one place. In a real system, you want it at multiple layers. The first is the API gateway. The API gateway is still the first line of defense, so coarse throttling here prevents massive traffic spikes from even reaching your services. It's not the smartest throttling. It doesn't know about the internal state of your servers, but it catches the obvious cases fast and cheap. The second is inside the application or the middleware. This is where throttling gets smarter. Your app code knows the current state of things, how long the database queries are taking, or how full the thread pool is, or how many in-flight requests there are. It can use that information to make real-time decisions about whether to accept, delay, or reject incoming work. Libraries that help manage this kind of thing exist across most languages and frameworks. They let you wrap individual operations like a database call or an external API request within throttling logic, so each piece of your system can protect itself independently. The third is at the database level. The database is almost always the hardest bottleneck to scale, and most databases have their own throttling built in. Take DynamoDB as an example. Every table has a capacity limit. If you try to read or write more than that limit allows, DynamoDB throttles the request. It doesn't crash, it just pushes back and says, slow down. The lesson here is that even if you're not explicitly building throttling into your application, your dependencies are throttling you. It's better to throttle yourself gracefully upstream than to get throttled abruptly by the database. Now, there's an important question that often gets skipped, which is when a request is throttled, what actually happens to it? So the option one is we can reject it immediately, return a 429 too many requests error, and tell the client to try again later. This is fast and simple, but the client has to retry. The second option is to queue it. You can put the request in a line and process it when the capacity opens up later. The client waits a bit longer, but eventually gets a response. This is good for background jobs or non-urgent work, and it's bad for real-time user interactions where latency matters. Option 3 is just to delay it, so you hold the request for a short time and try again internally. This is transparent to the client, but it adds latency and works for very short throttle windows. What you need to know here is that the right answer depends on the context. Real-time user requests should not be queued for too long, but background jobs can wait. So when a client gets a 429 error from throttling, it should, as a first option, back off. So it can wait before retrying and wait longer time each time it gets rejected. This is called as exponential back off, and we'll have a video about this in the intermediate system design playlist. The second option is you can add jitter. So you can randomize the retry timing slightly so all clients don't slam the server at the exact same moment when the window resets. Third is you can respect the retry after header. If the server tells you when to retry, listen to it. Now in production, sometimes you'll notice something called as a bad client behavior, which is a client retrying immediately in a tight loop. And this can actually make throttling worse. So if 1,000 clients all get throttled and all retry at the same second, you get a second spike right when the system was trying to recover. So everything we've talked about so far is still fairly static. You set limits and the system enforces them, but the most resilient production systems go a step further. So there's this thing called as adaptive throttling. So instead of a fixed limit like allow 500 requests per second, the system watches its own health. Things like response latency, error rates, CPU usage, and adjusts the throttle dynamically based on what it sees. If latency starts creeping up, the system tightens the throttle before things go wrong. If the system is healthy and underutilized, it loosens the throttle to let more through. So let's look at a few more concepts. There's one called back pressure, which is the idea that when a downstream system is overwhelmed, it sends a signal upstream saying slow down, and that signal propagates. Each layer in the chain adjusts its own behavior based on what the layer below is reporting. Now there's an entire video about back pressure in distributed systems in my intermediate system design playlist, so make sure you check it out. Now think of back pressure like a highway on-ramp meter. The freeway tells the on-ramp we are filled right now, and the on-ramp holds back cars until space opens up. The signal flows backward through the system. Now debouncing is a similar idea, but it fits right into this family of concepts. The problem it solves is that sometimes an event fires many times in rapid succession, but you only actually care about the final one. You don't want to act on every single trigger. You just want to wait for the activity to settle down and then act once. The classic example is a search bar. Every time a user types a character, an event fires. If you send a search request to your server on every single keystroke, you'll be firing dozens of requests while the user is still typing, most of which are for half-finished words that you don't care about. Instead, you should wait and you should say, I'll only send the request once the user has stopped typing for, let's say, 300 milliseconds. That's debouncing. Another example is a save button. If a user clicks it 5 times quickly by accident, you don't want to trigger 5 save operations. You just wait for the clicking to stop and then save only once. So what you need to know is debouncing isn't just about the server protecting itself. It's about the client being smart enough not to spam the server in the first place. So in this video, we learned quite a bit about throttling. We went through 19 different diagrams, and I'm sure you appreciate the amount of effort it takes to build these diagrams and to make these videos. If you liked this video, I want you to share it with your friends. I want you to subscribe to this channel and hit the like button on this video. Comment if you have any questions, and I'll see you in the next video.